Good afternoon, everyone. This is Deb Hawkinson, President of Forest Resources Association. I want to welcome you to our public policy webinar, and thank you for taking the time out of your day to participate. We're going to provide an update for you on the midterm elections, the latest on FRA's priority policy issues, guest worker visa, which I know you all have seen many of our grassroots alerts on recently, transportation challenges, the Farm Bill, Endangered Species Act, and just kind of give you an overview of what we see happening with the tariffs, which we know is impacting a lot of people out there. But before we get started, I just want to go over a few important housekeeping notes for people to keep in mind. We're going to use the chat feature to ask questions, and you'll find that option down at the bottom of your screen. So as you think of questions, go ahead and just type them in, and we will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. If for some reason you come into the webinar without audio or video, if this is not the case, mute yourself and take yourself off video so that we avoid having disruptions with the webinar. And if you're having any trouble with the webinar at any point, just call the office at 202-296-3937. I think that covers the main things to keep in mind. And now we'll get started, and it's my pleasure to introduce Tim O'Hara, who has really our newest member of FRA's team. I'm happy to have him on board with us. He's FRA's Government Affairs and Lake States Region Manager. And then Pat Rita, our longtime FRA's Government Affairs consultant, will be walking you through the presentation today. So Pat's going to kick it off with midterm elections.
Thanks, Deb. I think we are all painfully aware that we have an important election coming up in November, known as the midterms. All 435 House seats are up for election, as well as 34 seats in the Senate. The open question for many months now is whether Republicans will retain their control of the House of Representatives. That's been the subject of all manner of media coverage, but increasingly of late, the question of what happens in the Senate is coming to the fore. 6 months ago, it was a virtual certainty that Republicans would probably increase their margin of control in the Senate. That appears to be tightening considerably, and now the basic question is control of the Senate in play is at the fore. Let's start with the House, Jacob. On this slide, you'll see the current balance of power, which has Republicans in control with 236 seats, while the Democrats have 193. So in order for the Democrats to take control of the chamber, they have to get to the magic number of 218, which would require a net increase of 25 seats. The forecasting models are pretty sanguine on the prospects of Democrats doing just that, getting somewhere, at least at this point, what they're forecasting, somewhere north of the magic number of 218. In fact, they give it an 80% chance of that occurring in November. Now, why is that? I think this graph will demonstrate pretty clearly. You see that Democrats are already enjoying a lead in the likely Democrat seats and leaning Democrat seats. They have 206 compared to Republicans' 189. But really, the area of focus on this slide should be that middle column, where you've got 40 toss-up seats. A whopping 38 of those seats are Republicans, while only 2 are Democrat. So that gives you a pretty clear view of what the pundits are looking at when they're forecasting that, there's a very good chance the Democrats could take control of the House in November. We're obviously a long way out. I know it's a few short weeks till the election, but still a long way to go, but certainly trending in the Democrats' favor. So Jacob, on to the Senate, where I mentioned that there are 34 seats out of the 100 Senate seats up for election. The current balance of power, as we all know, is very slim. But, and this is a key but, Democrats are defending 26 of those 34 seats that are up for election. And many of those seats, or many of those states, however, Trump won handily in the 2016 election. And that is why forecasting models are predicting the Republicans to keep in the Senate. And so, although 6 months ago, as I mentioned, Republicans were expected to make gains, Now, if you look at this graph very closely, they're expected to barely hang on. And I think this graph from Real Clear Politics really illustrates the situation. If you add up the likely Democrat seats and the leaning Democrat seats, Democrats are clearly trailing. But like the House map, you really want to focus on that middle column. This column will decide whether Chuck Schumer is your Senate Majority Leader in January or Mitch McConnell. And you look at all of those races there, save in the middle, save for maybe one or two, they're all within the polling margin of error. So folks, buckle up. This is going to be a nail biter all the way into November, we predict. Now back to the House quickly. Should the House take control, we thought we'd sketch out a little roster of new chairmen beginning in January. And, you know, just a broad brush, it's pretty slim pickings. I would say that Colin Peterson, as chair of the House Agriculture Committee, he's a good legislator. He is definitely a blue dog Democrat. He's got really good staff. He has worked well with our industry, so I don't think we see any drop off there. He's a quality. He would be a quality chairman. Likewise with Peter DeFazio from Oregon. We worked closely with him on truck weights. He's a tough legislator, but he's principled, and I think he would give us a fair shake on our truck transportation related issues. With regard to the other incoming chairman, it's pretty thin gruel, and I think we're going to have definitely have our work cut out for us with these other chairmen. And I'm just going to power it right into policy here and start with guest worker visa reform. As you all know, that's been a top priority of FRA's now for the last at least 6 months. We've been focusing on legislation that would create a new guest worker visa program under an H2C category. This would include forestry workers. It would include an additional 400,000 plus visas for guest workers with an additional escalator clause should that cap be hit. We really like this bill. We've been working aggressively with our allies in the ag community, upwards of 200 different organizations, in advancing legislation in the House. The bill is known as the Ag and Legal Workforce Act. It's H.R. 6417. It was introduced by Chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Bob Goodlatte from Virginia. In the beginning of the summer, early August, the bill started out with somewhere near 40 co-sponsors. We are now up to 110 co-sponsors on the bill, so that's the good news. In fact, staff that are leading this effort in the House identified FRA as one of the top 2 organizations and most effective in recruiting co-sponsors for this bill. So good work, you all. It's a real testament to this organization's grassroots capabilities. So give yourselves a pat on the back. So that's the good news. The bad news is it doesn't look like, unless something miraculous happens, like the president were to tweet this afternoon that we need a guest worker visa bill, we're not likely to get a vote on this bill before the House recesses, likely at the end of this week. House leadership has just been gun shy. They've failed on a couple of votes on similar bills, and we just couldn't demonstrate to them that we had concrete proof that we had 218 votes to pass this bill. So really too bad. We think it's a really good piece of legislation that solves our issues and the issues of many other sectors that rely on this guest worker pool. However, all is not lost. We do have some regulatory options that might present themselves this fall through some DOL, Department of Labor rulemakings. And in addition, we understand that the Senate Homeland Security Appropriations Bill has a provision that ramps up or increases the number of H-2B visas considerably, and that legislation will be dealt with in December. So just keep that in mind, and I'll end there on guest worker visa by just saying thank you for all your efforts thus far, and we continue the fight.
Yep, thank you. And with that, I think we're going to turn it over to you, Tim, now to cover all of our transportation challenges.
Okay, thanks, Deb, and welcome everyone to the webinar this afternoon. So trucking has received a good bit of attention from not only the transportation industry, but also a number of national media outlets. The Washington Post USA Today, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal have all ran features on how the transportation industry challenges will lead to a slowed economic growth in this country. So as this gets more attention, we think from the media outlets, this will lead to increased pressure on congressional members, and hopefully Congress will get serious about addressing the challenges of the transportation industry. So how bad is it? The transportation industry swelled to a record of nearly 300,000 driver shortage in the second quarter of this year. The American Trucking Association anticipates that over the next 10 years, nearly 900,000 new drivers will be needed over the next decade to replace retirees and the growth in the industry. If you look at the competition in the industry, it is very competitive. For every dollar of revenue that the trucking industry earns, 95 cents of that is spent on operating costs. Again, this shows a very strong competition within this industry, and obviously if you have stronger competition, it leads to fair pricing. If you look at Class 1 railroads, on the other hand, who is the main opposition to the increased interstate weights, it's quite a different story. For every dollar of revenue generated by the Class 1 rail, 65 cents is spent on operating costs. So what caused this problem? So if you look back to 2004, the hours of service regulations changed, which reduced time behind the wheel. This significantly limited the earnings for drivers. People left the workforce. In addition to that, we have an aging workforce. Only 20% of the drivers are between 20 and 34. And currently we have a very strong economy. For truck tonnage rose nearly 8% in quarters 1 and 2 of 2018. And what you're seeing with low unemployment, the migration of truck drivers into other sectors, in particular the construction and manufacturing industries. So if this slide that's up on your screen now shows the difference between the transportation industry's share of the national workforce compared to 1994 and 2013. It's kind of an age class distribution if you look at it that way. So you can see the gap of younger workers has increased and the gap of older workers has increased as well. So less younger workers in the workforce and more older or aging workers in the workforce. So this is becoming a challenge. So the industry is taking on a number of measures. So they're lobbying to allow people younger than 21 to drive interstate routes. Currently, you have to be over 21 or 21 or over to drive interstates across state lines. The median salary for truckers has increased 15% from 2013 to 2017. Companies have signing bonuses, mentoring programs, trying to recruit more women into the industry. FRA is also informing and educating people on this issue. The fall board meeting, Leon Sakura, who was the former Assistant Secretary of Labor at the U.S. Department of Labor during the Bush administration, will share his insights on the workforce and labor issue. FRA has additionally presented information to the Board of Directors of the Michigan Forest Products Council and the Pulp and Paper Resource Council in mid-September. Next slide, Jacob. So transportation is becoming ever-increasing concern for businesses across all sectors. So if you look at the macroeconomic side of this, the troubles in trucking industry will lead to higher transportation costs, higher manufacturing costs, increased costs of goods, and ultimately will lead to inflation. So the problem with the gross vehicle weights on interstates is that it was established 35 years ago. So since that time, there's been significant advancements in vehicle safety. The pavement we use on our interstate system, highways, has improved tremendously. And the other factor there is that all 50 states have gross vehicle weight limits that are higher than interstates. So the state and county roads in all 50 states have higher gross vehicle weight limits than the interstate highways, which are built better to handle heavier loads. So FRA is working to find a national solution while recognizing the important provisions currently enjoyed by all 50 states out there. Next. So this map just is a graphic that shows all the states that have exemptions on certain portions of the interstate. So if you look at that map, 30 of the states have gross vehicle weights of portions of the interstate that exceed 90,000 pounds. And several states out west have gross vehicle weights on portions of the interstate that exceed 105,000 pounds. Again, all 50 states have weight limits that exceed the gross vehicle weight limits on interstates. Next. So the platform, the policy initiatives we are taking on are one of safety. So obviously, safety on our roadways is everyone's first priority. And one way to improve the safety on the roadways is to lessen the number of vehicles to reduce congestion. The number of Class 8 vehicles in operation is projected to increase by 20% from 3.4 million to 4.1 million by 2018. So with more trucks and at the current weights, this will lead to more congestion and increased risk on our roadways and more fuel usage. Safety could also be recognized by adding an additional 6-axle, as some initiatives are proposing. So if you add a 6-axle, more tires to your truck, that study in Wisconsin conducted in 2006 showed that would reduce braking distances up to 11%. Next. So the two main policy initiatives that FRA is involved in, first is the Right to Haul Act. This language of this initiative is very simple. It's very clean. It simply states that interstates would allow agricultural commodities, which includes logs, to operate at established state gross vehicle weights on interstates for certain distances. For instance, less than 150 miles, which should cover most logging transportation to facilities. The second is a more broader coalition, which is known as a SHIP coalition, which stands for Safer Hauling and Infrastructure Protection. So this has a number of members of this coalition, and what they are proposing is to increase the interstate gross vehicle weight to 91,000 pounds with the inclusion of a 6-axle. And this would be for all commodities transported on the interstate system. Next. So there's been several bills that have been introduced to address this issue as well. So 2 bills address the hours of service regulations. So the Hours Act looks to harmonize the hours of service rules for short truck haul drivers and exempt drivers from ELD requirements if they operate exclusively within 150 air miles of their reporting location. The REST Act revises regulations that would enhance flexibility of the hours of service requirements. And the Drive Safe Act addresses the commercial trucking age, which would lower that age from 21 to 18, and providing that these younger drivers have additional training and 240 hours of supervised on-the-road experience. There's also effort by the Federal Motor Carrier Administration. They are, I think, comments were due Monday on the advance notice of public rulemaking. So they are seeking input to determine if the hours of service regulations need to be changed. If they do find the rules need to be changed, they'll be published, and a proposed rule change will be forthcoming in the upcoming months. So the bottom line is right now we are not getting a lot of traction in Congress on increasing truck weights. Both appropriations committees from the House and the Senate passed language or did not include language that recognize increased weights or different truck sizes. This is primarily due to a strong opposition by the Class 1 rail lobby. If you find someone to sponsor a bill, the railroad lobby will spend a lot of time in the office of that legislator. Midterms elections, that's another issue right now. Folks do not want to put their name on a bill out there to be recognized as somebody who would support increased weights on interstate systems. Again, that's in opposition to the strong lobby that the Class 1 railroads have. So the road ahead, we're looking at with the midterm elections, it's very unlikely that either the Right to Haul or SHIP coalition would get support to introduce a bill in the House or Senate. In terms of Right to Haul, it would provide us with time to reevaluate our strategy. This is really becoming a workforce issue, and if it's not addressed, could affect the United States economy in a negative way. We also need to have discussions, I believe, with Class 1 railroads. We need to let them understand our business, because if you're hauling logs, you're typically are not seeking to haul by rail for short distances. So we need to determine what that distance is appropriate for hauling logs that the rail lobby is okay with. For wood products, as I mentioned earlier, 150 miles from the woods to the mills should be sufficient. So FRA is going to continue to move forward on the Right to Haul initiative, but it may include some different strategies as we look for sponsorship of legislation. The SHIP Coalition, they are continuing their efforts as well. They are currently looking to implement a pilot project that would allow increased weights up to 91,000 pounds with a 6-axle in several states. Currently, they have support from more than 50 congressional members in this effort. And lastly, midterm elections will play a large role in addressing the transportation issues as committee chairs may change. Pat, I'll turn that back to you.
Thanks, Tim. Believe it or not, the current Farm Bill expires this Sunday, September 30th. Currently, we have the House has passed its version earlier this summer. The Senate has passed its version. And now those two versions are the subject of conference committee negotiations, which have proven to be pretty sticky on a couple of key areas, unrelated to our issues, but nonetheless, it's unlikely, likely impossible at this point, that a farm bill would be wrapped up and sent to the president by Sunday. So the farm bill is going to lapse. Leadership in the House and the Senate are saying that they will likely finalize a farm bill after the election, sometime in late November or early December. But the three areas of focus for FRA have been federal forest management, the Timber Innovation Act, and the Community Wood Energy Program, which relates to biomass energy. So let me start with federal forestry. The House version of the Farm Bill authorizes 5 or 6 new, what are known as categorical exclusions, which are essentially exemptions from the National Environmental Protection Act, which would allow the Forest Service to conduct needed forest management project work on federal forest lands without having to undergo costly and time-consuming environmental reviews. We really like these provisions. The Senate bill had 0. That's big goose egg in terms of provisions on forest management. And that was a bit of a strategic call by the Senate leadership. They wanted to get to conference and kind of negotiate over a few of these things. So the long and short of it is we're hopeful that the final conference report will include all of the House-passed categorical exclusions, but realistically, that's not likely. The Senate in its current makeup is not going to swallow all of these different provisions, but we're hopeful that the Senate will be able to negotiate 2 or 3 of them to get to the president's desk, and combined with what we were able to accomplish in the spending deal last December, which also has some new tools for the Forest Service to do forest management work. We think between those two initiatives, we've made a lot of progress. We're going to continue to have to chip away, but a lot of progress on that issue thus far. Moving forward into the Timber Innovation Act, both bills include provisions of this important piece of legislation, which promotes wood in taller structures. Those would be with stories greater than, I think, 6 or 8 stories and higher. We really like the Senate's version though, because it has not only the research and development provisions, but also the wood innovation grant language that's key to moving, these new products like mass timber and the like into these taller structures. The concrete lobby has been very aggressive in opposing inclusion of our language, but we have the ear of the chairman, fortunately, in both chambers, and we're hopeful that the Senate version will prevail. And finally, with respect to the Community Wood Energy Program, this is a little known biomass energy program that's in the existing Farm Bill. It's got a very small authorization. It's never been funded by the appropriations committees, but the sawmill sector views it as a potential solution for the sawmill residuals issue. Essentially, what this program would do was it would give grants for installation of high-efficient biomass heating systems in both public and private institutions across the country. And these would be biomass systems that would run on sawmill residuals, essentially sawdust converted into pellets or chips generated in sawmills. The House version has $25 million a year for this program for not only biomass energy, but also for grants to promote innovative wood products facilities. So we really like that language. The Senate really keeps the current law as it is. So we have been talking with conferees about our support for the House version to prevail in any final conference report. Tim, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sure. So, just Pat, on the Farm Bill, I think on the categorical exclusion side, the key there on the Senate would be Debbie Stabenow from Michigan. So if you have contacts with her office, that would be a good one to reach out to and see where she is in supporting those new authorities for the Forest Service. So the other issue that's been looked at quite a bit here on both the legislative and regulatory side is the Endangered Species Act. On the regulatory side, the administration has proposed multiple changes in several areas of the ESA. And on the legislative side of things, the ESA discussion draft has been released, and members of the Western Caucus, which is a bipartisan group that has 79 members that stretches across 33 different states, introduced a modernization package, which they are claiming it's good for the species, the communities, science, taxpayers, and the economy. Next slide. So just a little more detail on the regulatory actions, and these comments were due Monday. FRA did submit comments on the proposed rule changes. So some of the things they're looking at is the value of economic impact data prior to listing the species. They are restoring the pre-2016 rule, which limits consideration of unoccupied areas as critical habitat to where, which looks at situations where there is inadequate occupied habitat. So that was changed in the Obama administration. That rule was also a change during that time was the blanket rule. And this was done by the Department of Interior, which automatically provided threatened species with the same protections as endangered species. They also looking at amendments to the consultation process between interagencies under Section 7. So when the Fish and Wildlife Service works with the Forest Service on endangered species project, they're trying to make this process go quicker in a more timely fashion. So that should ease up red tape on national forest projects and hopefully get more projects implemented on the ground. On the legislative side, Senator John Barrasso from Wyoming, who's chair of the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee, released amendments to the 2018 discussion draft. And the release of the discussion draft amendments authorizes the ESA for the first time since its funding authorization expired in 1992. Included in that discussion draft are provisions that provide more authority to state agencies in development of recovery plans for listed species. So there's some good and bad with that. I think it comes down, if you give which state you're giving more authority. So we're going to be monitoring that one as well. The Western Caucus, they introduced 9 amendments back on July 12th, and these included in those amendments would requirement of the Fish and Wildlife Service to make available all data it uses to determine a listing of a species, and that data will be available online. So FRA supports the changes that are going on in the regulatory and legislative process that would streamline and improve and modernize the law. As you know, the Endangered Species Act has probably one of the most economic impacts of the forest products industry in history, back in the early 90s with the spotted owl. So changes to modernize this, make it more transparent, and improve the efficiencies are welcome.
And I'm going to close it out with tariffs. As most of you know, Monday this week, the U.S. began imposing tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese imports. The initial tariff rate starts out at 10%, and that will, or that is slated to ratchet up to 25% beginning in January of 2019. China immediately retaliated, imposing tariffs on 60 billion of exports from this country, and the ranges vary from 5 to I think 15%. But a lot of our products are covered in that retaliation, wood and paper. I know that segments of our sector have already been hit hard just with the specter of retaliation from China, and I'm thinking about our friends in the hardwood industry that rely on exports to mainland China. Upwards of 80% of all that's exported goes to China from the hardwood sector. I will tell you this is a difficult issue for national trade associations here in town because depending on where you are in the value chain, these tariffs can either hurt you badly, not hurt you at all, or benefit you. And so a number of trades in town have had a difficult time positioning on this issue. I think while we have not declared an official position, FRA has tried to navigate this by echoing the concept that, you know, we've always been for free and fair trade, and we urge the administration to get back to the negotiating table with China to hammer out the differences. We, you know, thought that this was going to be a short-lived exercise and that someone would blink, but based on rhetoric from both sides of the Pacific, I fear that we're in a bit of a long haul. So I'm going to stop there and open it up if Deb, you want to amplify that, or Tim, if you have any comments.
I think I want to thank both you and Tim. It's been a good source of information for everyone. And I don't believe we have any questions out there right now, but there's still opportunity to type something on your screen if you have a question. Also, if something comes to mind later on, you, I think, all know our email. Don't hesitate to call the office, and we'll be happy to help you with details on any issue that we covered today or another issue that you may be interested in. But before we close, I do want to encourage you all to continue to stay politically engaged, and by showing up today and being on this call, I think you're showing you understand the importance of it. I also want to thank you for your help in helping us make a difference. I know Pat mentioned that earlier, but your voice really does make a difference, and it helps us move the needle on priority policies that are important to the industry. And most important, your legislators want to hear from you. It's a great chance for you to build relationships. So please do remember our grassroots alerts that we send around, our Friday political updates. All of that can be forwarded to your coworkers, anyone in your company, people in your community that support our industry. We depend on a broad outreach of support across the country and from all sectors. That's FRA's tagline. We are the only national association in the forest products industry that represents all sectors, and that, I think, gives us a very strong voice and helps us make a difference up on Capitol Hill. So again, thank you for that. And I do think a question's come up. Do you want to read that off, Pat?
It's where are we with Canadian tariffs and imports? And I know that's an issue that we have not really engaged in. We haven't gotten in that issue. So that's.
Well, Deb, I know a little bit about that. That's in reference to NAFTA. So U.S. and Mexico settled on a NAFTA agreement and now they're working on that. The Canadian and the U.S. side are still working to reach an agreement on NAFTA, and from last time I heard, they're a ways apart on that issue. So that's still in negotiations.
But some of these, we kind of watch the news like y'all. We try to follow what's going on there because there's no shortage of things going on. So with that, I hope to see many of you at FRA's Fall Board meeting in Lexington, Kentucky on October 10th through 12th. And if you haven't registered or if you're interested in learning more about our work, please visit our website, www.forestresources.org. And with that, I think we're done for the day. So thank you so much, and watch for our next webinar. Take care.